What's the most absurd fact that sounds fake but is actually true? Mazda has had the two most oddly specific product recalls in automotive history. 1. They had to recall a bunch of Mazda 6 because spiders kept infesting the fuel lines. For whatever reason, this problem was limited to one model, and only one generation of that model. Spiders didn't f with any of their other cars. 2. They had to recall a bunch of other cars because the infotainment system would break whenever users tried to listen to 94.9 KUOW radio in Seattle. It wasn't the wavelength stations on 94.9 in other cities were totally fine. This problem was specific to KUOW. The issue with Mazda and KUOW was that the Mazda infotainment system couldn't handle an image file without a file extension, so instead of something like image.jpg, the file sent was just named image. KUOW sent the file via HD radio. Once the Mazda infotainment system loaded the misnamed file from the station, it got permanently stuck on that station and had to be replaced. Suffice to say, Mazda couldn't guarantee another radio station wouldn't do the same thing, so they had to recall the system. Out of all the animals in the world, the most successful hunter by far, with a stunning success rate of 95%, is the dragonfly. If those things were big enough, they'd be a viable threat to most other creatures. Found this out while working at a vet clinic. A sloth takes so long to digest food that it can starve to death on a full stomach. Nature is just weird sometimes. At one point, in Hawaii, you were more likely to get attacked by Ezra Miller than a shark. There's a species of jellyfish called Turritopsis dohrnii, also known as the immortal jellyfish, that can literally reverse its aging process. When it's injured, sick, or even just stressed, it reverts its cells back to their earliest form, essentially starting its life over again. It's like the creature figured out how to cheat death, hitting the reset button on its existence. Crazy in my opinion. Feeling a wee bit stressed? Reverts back to baby. I'd be down for that. Boss hits me with a 8:30 performance review meeting and finds a newborn sitting at my cubicle. About 2/3 of your human ancestors are female. It's because of pedigree collapse, where you should have 2 parents, for grandparents, 8 GT grandparents, etc. So, going back about 30 generations, i.e. the Middle Ages, you should have 1 billion ancestors, which is more people than even existed. In reality, as you go back in your family tree, the same people start to appear multiple times. For example, anyone with any English blood will have King Edward I as an ancestor on dozens of separate lines because of his many children, including bastards. The flip side of this is that many more males than females leave no descendants at all. Egypt is older than a lot of people realize. There were archaeologists in ancient Egypt. I think the fact was that Egypt has been around so long that they had archaeologists, whose specialty was ancient Egyptian history. There was a museum in ancient Babylon. Archaeological survey realized they were looking at a museum when they found objects dated to 2,000 years apart and labeled. The only member of the rock band ZZ Top that didn't have a beard was the drummer. His name is Frank Beard, which translates to Bearded Frank. Some companies are over 1,000 years old. 90% of them are in Japan. There was a shipwreck in 1664, a shipwreck in 1785, and a shipwreck in 1820. Each had one survivor. Each survivor was named Hugh Williams. Was it the same Hugh Williams? And did he survive because he suffers from immortality? Hugh Williams was a jellyfish, obviously. I see a lot of octopus facts, but what I find most interesting besides their intelligence and hearts is that they only live about 3 years. They mate once and die. It's theorized that that's the reason they're just animals. If they had longer lives, it isn't unlikely that they would have evolved further and possibly became a sapient species. Do they live longer in captivity like other animals? I know they escape from captivity a bunch. Should we help the octopods live longer? Would this be humanity's downfall? Some don't live long in captivity, and even ones that do well are only expected about 5. Although there is a species that might live to 18 in the deep, but I don't think he's coming up here anytime soon. All the planets in the solar system, even Pluto, could fit between Earth and the Moon, when the Moon is in the farthest point in its orbit. Honeybees can recognize human faces. Loki terrifying knowing they remember who wronged them. They're out there keeping receipts. Crows do this too. That cigarette lighters were invented before matches. In a related fact, it took around 50 years after the can was invented to invent the can opener. In the meantime, a hammer and chisel were used. Certain species of nautilus have a detachable penis with its own swimming appendage. It will send its penis on a death mission to procreate. The nautilus woke up this morning with a bad hangover, and its penis was missing again. This happens all the time. It's detachable. The last wild cow died in 1627. Wait, of course they used to be wild, but I never thought about it. Yeah, they were really impressive animals. The aurochs, the last one hunted in Poland in the 17th century, averaged 6 feet, about 2 meters, at the shoulder, with about a 1 meter span for the horns. That was the animal we domesticated cows from. I worked on dairy farms as a teen, and went to plenty of agricultural fairs, and still do. I have never seen a bull that is 6 foot at the shoulder. That would be a terrifying monster. The atoms in your body are around 13 billion years old. They aren't yours, they've been here as long as life itself. You're just the latest assembly. Carl Sagan. Few mummies survive to the present day because people used to eat them. I just thought it was just because they're dead. 46 BC was the longest year in human history, 445 days. 2020 lasted at least 10 years. It was a real shitstorm. And 2023 came directly after 2019. Tortoises can go in a fridge to hibernate over winter. This is written like a video game loading screen tip LOL. Elvis was a blonde originally. There is only one country between Norway and North Korea. The company that makes Lamborghini started as a tractor company, and only began making them out of spite against Ferrari. IRC. Ferruccio Lamborghini owned a Ferrari and thought the clutch was awful. He was constantly having to have it rebuilt, and was sick of it. He went to Enzo Ferrari about it, who basically told Lamborghini to fuck off. After that, Lamborghini modified his Ferrari's clutch to be more reliable than stock and decided to start making cars. During the last Ebola outbreak in the US, it was more likely that you date Taylor Swift and have her write a hit song about your breakup than you were to get Ebola. 80% of 1923-born Soviet men did not make it through World War II. A day on Venus is longer than its year. I learned this in astronomy class and still can't wrap my head around it. The planet literally takes longer to rotate once than to go around the sun. Space is weird. The average number of skeletons inside the human body is greater than 1.0. Pregnant women blowing the average. The 26 richest people in the world own as much wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion people. There is a giant hexagon, bigger than the Earth, on the North Pole of Saturn. It's permanent and made of hurricanes. On the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the Louisiana Purchase, the group happened to encounter Sacagaya's brother, whose tribe helped them make it through the winter. What's even crazier about that is that she was abducted when she was 13 by the Hidatsa, 4 years before this. So she was abducted, trafficked hundreds of miles away from home, a home that wasn't set. The Shoshone were nomadic, sold into slavery, happened to be hired by Lewis and Clark, then happened to meet her brother in the middle of nowhere. The Lewis and Clark expedition also had a situation straight out of a comedy skit. They encountered a tribe where the people only spoke Salishan, but no one in their group spoke Salishan. The tribe had a slave that spoke Salishan and Shoshone. Sacagawea knew Shoshone and Hidatsa. Her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, spoke Hidatsa and French. Another man spoke English and French. So Lewis and Clark had to communicate by having their words translated 4 times. English, French, Hidatsa, Shoshone, Alishan. Some octopuses can lobotomize themselves if they don't chew their food properly. The moose natural predator is the orca whale. The entirety of Wikipedia can be downloaded, and the total file size is smaller than the latest Call of Duty. Hummingbirds' feet are so small that they only use them for perching, scratching, and nest building. Instead of using their feet to launch into flight, the wings do all the work. Their order name, apodiforms, meaning footless, makes sense when seeing a hummingbird in flight. Their feet are nearly invisible. While they do have feet, they do not have knees. Over 50% of Americans have the literacy level of a 6th grader or lower. That's almost half. If you knock your tooth out and put it back in the socket, it'll grow roots back and save the tooth. Janet Jackson's 1989 song, Rhythm Nation, can crash some laptops with specific hard drives. The song's resonant frequency matches the natural resonant frequency of certain hard drives, causing them to shut down. Tasmanian devil populations are heavily impacted by a contagious cancer that causes facial tumors. When devils bite each other on the face, the cancer cells spread from one individual to the next, and due to low genetic variation, it is able to evade the new host's immune system and multiply. These cancer cells originally started out as normal Tasmanian devil cells but are now a separate parasitic organism. But by phylogenetic classification, they are considered a descendant of Tasmanian devils and so would also be considered a marsupial. Similar contagious cancers have been found in dogs, Syrian hamsters, and clams. The planet Mars is inhabited exclusively by robots. More recently, a whale being trained as a spy by the Russians was found in Norway. Most fish don't fart, but herring do. A study found they likely communicate via farting. It's like their own version of social media. Instead of Twitter, it's Squeaker. Birds cannot taste spice. This is actually why peppers evolved. The spice would keep other animals away, so only birds would eat them and spread their seeds. Then humans came along and decided, this hurts good, and made them much more powerful than they would be in nature. What's the most absurd fact that sounds fake but is actually true? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.